Let's talk to Allie Renison. She's a former trade advisor to the UK government and now works for the consultancy firm SEC Newgate. Great to have you on the show again. Now, tariffs on pharmaceuticals have been taboo, really. I mean, how surprised are you that medicines are now on the list?
Well, it's not just obviously medicines, it's the wider pharmaceutical industry. And I think one of the things that the sector is certainly holding its breath is to see, is it just about finished products? Is it about raw materials that go into it? Is it inputs? Obviously, I think the specter of the COVID pandemic has certainly kind of underscored the need to try and continue exempting the medical sector from tariffs. It's interesting that actually during the pandemic we had a lot of export restrictions, and actually under Trump's first presidency, he decided to exempt, particularly for China, tariffs on medical devices. But I think he's looked at Ireland and said, how do we actually try and bring some of that manufacturing back? I wouldn't be surprised if we see a lot of carve-outs and exemptions, which is what the sector is lobbying for currently.
But I wonder, though, will there be a ripple effect? What do you think the consequences might be for American pharmaceutical companies, as well as European, Chinese, Indian pharmaceutical firms?
Well, it's interesting, when you speak to the sector, they're saying that in terms of the impact, they'll probably see a delay effectively of, 6 to 12 months to actually see any serious kind of ripple effect. But the question is also, do we see a sort of delay, for example, on regulatory approvals? Do the costs necessarily go up, in terms of the inflationary impact on prices, particularly if raw materials and the inputs are affected?
Will these tariffs mean that the price of drugs, of medicines, of medical devices, are they going to go up? Is the price of healthcare going to go up?
I don't think necessarily healthcare writ large, but certainly I think the cost, ultimately the people who need to have access to the raw materials and the inputs. And that's why I say there's a big question mark around how much are these tariffs that Trump has trailed. We don't have any more detail besides pharmaceuticals writ large. Is that going to affect the entirety of that supply chain? Is it going to be concentrated on finished goods, on medicines themselves? I think it's going to be actually unlikely that the actual finished products, medicines, as you sort of mentioned in your report, tend to be sort of exempt under WTO rules from a lot of these tariffs. But there are other ways in which the U.S. could tax the imports of that, particularly around the sort of supply chain, around inputs, about raw materials. So really the devil is in the detail. But I think the anticipation is, yes, the cost is going to be inflationary, and people will be charging, the pharmaceutical companies will be charging more to sort of to reflect the increase of tariffs on their inputs.
I appreciate you saying the devil's in the detail, but with these tariffs looming, what's your diagnosis for the European pharmaceutical sector in the medium term?
I think everything's going to become effectively a lot more expensive. I don't think we're going to see a huge forced relocation of, particularly in Ireland, the pharmaceutical industry to the U.S. I think it's probably likely that you will see some of these companies opening up new locations in addition to. But ultimately, if you look at, for example, Ireland, not the chief reason, there's a lot of kind of R&D, research and development and innovation that's done in Ireland and across the EU. But we might start to see basically is new investment facilities being opened up in the U.S., which I'm sure the President and the White House will say is due to the tariff threats. I think you're looking at cost increases and maybe parallel locations, but I don't think we're talking about entire supply chains being relocated to the U.S.
What about countermeasures that you might expect? I mean, the recent Critical Medicines Act proposed by the European Commission suggests a Buy European principle for essential medicines.
I think we're going to see a lot of stockpiling, potentially. I think that's one of the drivers behind what you identify there. It's certainly going to be a lot more in terms of procurement. I think we're going to see European countries, particularly the EU, trying to invest more in making sure that there's a steady stream of income coming from sort of state governments from the EU to ensure that, it doesn't actually, the Trump tariffs do not incentivize any of that forced relocation away. But I stress that I don't think, because of the complexity in actually moving a lot of these supply chains, I don't think we're going to see an absolute lift and shift over to the U.S.